Great, thank you. So just very briefly, SBJI is a project of the Minnesota Coalition Against Sexual Assault. Our mission is we are dedicated to promoting justice for victims of sexual violence through multidisciplinary collaboration, leadership, and resources. We know that many of you listening in on the webinar today bring many of those assets, so thank you. And also to learn more about SBJI, you can go to our website at any time. Okay, our presenters today, myself, Leah Lutz, and Sharon Haas, we are with the Sexual Violence Justice Institute. Both of us are collaboration specialists and work one-on-one with SART teams here in Minnesota and across the country. And my other role with SBJI, I'm also the Training and Connections Coordinator, and Sharon here is our Research and Evaluation Coordinator. We are also very fortunate to have 3 team leaders also share their expertise and experience as well. We're going to have Brenda Skogman, who's Isanti County Sexual Assault Interagency Council in Cambridge, Minnesota. That's about an hour north here of the metro area and is more of a rural type setting. We have Heather Brantner from the Baltimore City SART in Maryland, the coordinator, obviously more of an urban setting, and Leslie Miller, who plays dual roles and wears multiple hats. She's the team coordinator for the Salt Lake City SART and also then supports SART teams across the state of Utah in different contexts as well, both rural, urban, new, veteran teams as well. So we wanted to give you both the perspective of SBJI and our work working with teams, and then from 3 coordinators who are working in the field that come from slightly different settings.
This is Sharon. To give you some context, first of all, we know that those of you out there who play a leadership role with teams are in various situations. Some of you work formally with formally established teams, and for others it might be less of a formal structure. And you yourself might have a specific amount of your time designated for that role. And then for others who serve as team coordinators, this might be a volunteer role for you, or it might be a role that's shared with others. And so, but we think that in whatever context you find yourself, there will be something of relevance for you to take away here today. So in addition to that, here's what success looks like for us. We want to present you with a loose framework for thinking about the various tasks and responsibilities that make up the role of multidisciplinary team leadership. We'll at least touch a bit on some of the research related to the subject. And then you'll have the opportunity, as Leah mentioned, to hear from leaders in the field who are currently in this role. They'll share some of the things that had contributed most to the success of their teams and some of what they've learned along the way. A leader is best when people barely know she exists. When her work is done, her aim fulfilled, they'll say, "We did it ourselves," from Lao Tzu. You who are multidisciplinary group leaders are all keenly aware that a big part of your role is to involve and engage members of your team, create a trusting and welcoming environment where team members bring their knowledge and their experience to the discussion in ways that inform the work and lead to strong decisions on the part of the group. And when done well, the team as a whole will have a sense of engagement, satisfaction, and accomplishment. And often the parts that you play as team leadership in making that happen are somewhat invisible. Here's another quote that relates to the role of site coordinator or team leader from a well-known author, educator on organizational management and leadership, Peter Drucker. Management here refers to the coordination role that team leaders play, dealing with the many critical tasks and details of the role. The role of site coordinator falls heavily into the area of management and coordination of the different parts. The leadership part here is more, that's referred to here, is more about steering the ship or heading in the right direction, checking the compass by letting best practice, research, and your experience with what gets the results you desire inform the direction of the team. Maybe this role is played by you as a coordinator, or maybe it's played by another member of your team. But in any case, it's a crucial role and not to be overlooked or neglected. In a study conducted by Nicole Allen, looking not specifically at SARTs, but actually at domestic violence coordinating councils, the authors asked team leaders to describe their role with teams, and these were the responses that resulted. You can see several of the roles that you played as team coordinators represented here. A bridge between organizations and disciplines, administrative tasks and functions, bringing new knowledge, bringing new information to the team, driving the activity of the team, or focusing their attention on the right things, as leadership was described in this last slide, or influencing the process and the structure. So if you can think about, if you were describing your work as a site coordinator or a team leader, what would these numbers look like for you? Before we go a little bit further into talking about the role of team leadership or site coordinators, we want to talk a little bit about what it is we're referring to. It's important to at least mention that what we're talking about when we refer to SARTs or any multidisciplinary effort that's focused on sexual assault cases within a system. For our purposes, we're talking about an entity whose overarching goal is, to some extent, what's stated here on the slide. The purpose being making our criminal justice response the best tool and process that it can be for addressing all sexual assault cases effectively, and that's evidenced by strong investigations of cases that get charged, cases that get prosecuted, cases that yield just outcomes while respecting victims. In terms of structure, generally what we're referring to is a formally or a loosely connected grouping of responders from most of the core disciplines that address sexual assault cases. And in order for team leadership to be relevant, the grouping needs to meet at least on some periodic basis, hopefully monthly or at least quarterly. Those involved represent the different disciplines within the system, as I mentioned, including advocacy, law enforcement, healthcare responders, prosecution, probation, and sometimes other community agencies. And again, a group whose purpose is what's stated generally here on the slide. So this is generally what we mean when we say a SART, even though you may have variations to this, and you might have a different name. This is generally what we're referring to. And so now I'm going to turn this over to Leah again.
Great. All right, this is Leah again. So when planning this webinar, Sharon and I had quite a few discussions, and we wanted to give you some sort of visual for thinking about the content of today's webinar, as well as thinking about your role of the site coordinator and what it means. So we came up with this, and you're looking at that picture of the iceberg. And if you can think of the tip of the iceberg as that team meeting, that exposed part, that part that is visible, the part that usually gets a lot of attention, where some really meaningful and productive work can happen. So think of that, those meetings that Sharon just referenced that happen monthly or, perhaps quarterly, perhaps more often as well. What is underneath the water is the role of the site coordinator. We know there are many important elements to that role. We know that based on our experience working with teams, from the research, and from learning from you. And we're going to now go into a little bit more specifics, but think of that part, the site coordinator role is that planning role, the connecting role, strategy, figuring out the tools that are appropriate to take place or be used in the meetings to help you with that authentic work. The facilitation plan, connecting with critical players, disciplines prior to the meetings, after the meetings, thinking of intentionality about the plan, what needs to be introduced to the group in preparation for protocols, behind the scenes work, case consultation, and so on. And what we're trying to really help you in today's webinar is have you obviously think about the tip of the iceberg, but then think about your role as being underneath that, supporting those functions, and so on. All right, so we have some more pictures here. We also know that there are obviously differences across the country as well as similarities. So differences in that iceberg, that team meeting could be how often the team meets, meeting size, different fiscal agencies. We know that SART teams, multidisciplinary efforts, are even called different things. We're using SART, but we know that multidisciplinary initiatives go by a variety of names. Priority areas make up who houses them, from coming from community-based or system-based, and so on. We know that varies. We also know that the water per se that iceberg floats in is very different across the country, and you all operate in different contexts, rural, urban, campus, tribal, same SART, veteran teams, new teams, teams that need to kind of remotivate, re-energize, maybe revisit that mission, and so on. So we know that you operate in different contexts and that there's a variety of teams across the country. However, we also know that there are similarities in how you go about the work. So this webinar, we're really going to acknowledge the differences, because I think it's really, really important. You're all doing similar work and you're all doing a little bit of different work. However, our goal is to focus on the similarities in the characteristics of the team leadership that lead to effective teams. So one more iceberg picture, and we all have been in a heat wave in July too, so we thought this might be kind of appropriate and fun as well. So for today's webinar, we're going to focus on the part of the iceberg team that is below the surface that you see is often larger than the tip of the iceberg, often makes up the majority of that iceberg, but that what we cannot see, and that is the role of the team coordinator. And so why did we want to just spend a few moments thinking about that? We know that you're all seeking change, some sort of change, and team leadership, the role of the team, multidisciplinary initiatives is one way to go about seeking change in the criminal justice system, the response for victim survivors in your community. And what we have learned is that the successful team leadership often depends on what is just below that surface to achieve the change that you want in your community, to achieve the change that you are all seeking. Those parts that seem invisible or below the surface are actually the crucial elements of effective systems change work. And again, they're the commonalities to attend to, no matter what context the team functions in. So it's our goal is to really lay out now some more specifics about the role of the team leader, give you some things to consider, but really keep in mind that our motivation, our intention is for you to seek that change that you want in your community. You really need to attend to those different elements.
So what are those invisible things that all of you who are team leaders or site coordinators are doing that lead to successful teams that accomplish systems change. We've drawn those into 3 categories here, mostly for the purpose of describing them. And you see the 3 categories of leader, facilitator, and coordinator. Some skills and responsibilities certainly cross over into more than one of these categories. That's why we're referring to this as a loose framework. Some aspects of these categories are somewhat fluid. Another point we want to make in outlining these skills and responsibilities and qualities is that it's not necessary that every one of these roles be filled by a single person in the team coordinator. You just want to be intentional about how and if the roles are assigned or fulfilled within the team. The first one, the leadership role, refers, as mentioned earlier, to that steering the ship role. To clarify, steering the ship in this instance doesn't refer to calling the shots about what happens in any particular meeting. It's a broader calling the shots that is informed by an understanding rooted in experience, in research, and in others' experience with practices that have led to better results for victims, for cases, and for sexual violence as a whole. We'll talk more about this in slides that follow. The facilitator role refers to attention paid to the context and to the process. Are the conditions present where meaningful work can occur with the right people at the table, under the right circumstances, and with conditions in place that authorize them to make decisions and carry out the work of the team, carry the work of the team forward within their own agencies as well as within the team context? And then finally, the coordinator role refers to all the ways that team leadership maintains connections and continuity between members and between meetings. As you can see, and as I mentioned before, this is a loose framework. Many aspects of these roles blend together and overlap one another. Our purpose for dividing them out this way is, number 1, to highlight the importance of each aspect of the role. Number 2, for those of you out there who either have part-time or volunteer leadership, which is maybe a good number of you, this might help you think about how individuals or groups might fill each of these roles. And number 3, to help you to ensure that each role is being played in some way and that you're not leaving out important parts of any of them. So here's a glimpse at each of the roles and their accompanying goals and possible strategies. We're going to go into greater depth with each of these categories in the slides that follow. But just to introduce, we'll be talking about team leadership being comprised of the leader goals and strategies. And then we'll look at facilitator goals and strategies. And finally, the coordinator goals and strategies. And again, then you'll have the opportunity to hear about them in concrete ways from the experiences and the insights of our team leader panel that will follow regarding many of these points. Our intent here is not to go into great depth on any one of these points, but more to present the range that the role requires and to provide a framework for thinking about the components of the role. So the leader role. The reason we started with the leadership category rather than coordinator or facilitator is because the latter two have more to do with relating to a team or to that process. And as you know, your team or establishing a team is a strategy or a part of the how of carrying out what you're trying to accomplish. It's not the what of what you're trying to achieve. So before moving to the how, you want to focus a little bit of time and attention on the what. And this is related to the leadership role, or the steering the ship, defining a common focus and a set of goals. The leader role is about the what you're trying to accomplish, the team's purpose for being, what will be true in the end when your team is successful. So in order to secure meaningful leadership buy-in from participating agencies and disciplines, you want to be able to describe the purpose of the group and what is your reason for coming together as teams. The team itself will want to name its purpose and its vision, but clarity about this on the part of agency leadership is an important stepping off point. One of the things that Javdani and Allen found in 2011 research is that identifying systems change as a goal is key from the start. This study found that teams perceived to be the most effective at accomplishing their goals had systems change as a focus in their early stages. Identifying successful and promising practices is an important step to integrate near the beginning of your team's process. Sometimes when we think about establishing protocols together, we think about documenting what we already do within each discipline and how to link those steps and stages. While certainly that's a part of it, but in addition to that, we're also talking about making changes that might improve the effectiveness of our roles and doing new things. So exploring changes that have worked for others is an important step. This involves strengthening and spreading what we do well, but also learning about and applying new approaches that we've not employed before. This is where that courage part on the slide plays a role. Not only recognizing the courage that team members are exercising, but trying new approaches or proposing new approaches within their departments or within their disciplines. And then recognizing that implementing new ways of doing things will require some courage and some prolonged commitment to move forward. You'll be hearing more about this from our team leader panel. So in terms of strategies for the leadership role, you can probably see how these strategies correspond with the previous goals just discussed. We already talked about identifying immediate and longer range goals from the start, identifying that systems change goal. That second bullet point is probably another webinar in itself. Building in evaluative processes that help the team check out progress. But it's an important point to include here. Building in evaluative processes can be as simple as reviewing in some systematic way data from your team that already exists. It need not be elaborate, but it needs to start with taking a look at what your team wants to find out and then developing a method for gathering some information about that. As you're making key changes in the ways in which your system addresses sexual assault cases or in the training that you offer, you'll want to build in at least small ways to see if practices are changing and whether or not you're seeing some different results. A best practice work group, mentioned there on the slide as well, is something you may hear more about from our team leadership panel. And as many of you know from experience, system consultation is an evaluative way to explore how to identify and how to integrate a better approach to a problematic situation within the system as it arises. And we've talked about creating the space where new approaches can be tried and also about the courage that that requires. The facilitator role relates to the conditions that exist during the time that the team is together. So one of the things that's mentioned there, getting the right people at the table, refers to ensuring that the folks who are at the table have the authority to make decisions and that they have their agency's endorsement to be at this table making decisions on the part of their agency. And I think some of our team leaders will talk about that, the experience that they've had with that. It's helpful for moving forward if team members are clear about roles and about expectations. Who's responsible for what? Some teams assign meeting facilitators, and for others, the site coordinator plays that role. Giving team leaders meaningful roles is certainly a way to involve them in the process if they're clear about roles and about responsibilities. And we touch on facilitating the process in the next slide, and again, during our leadership panel. So some possible ways for creating the conditions where meaningful work can happen. Meaningful interagency agreements that get revisited within leadership on a periodic basis. Regarding the creation of a trusting environment, one possible starting point could be to have an intentional conversation with the team as they begin their work together to establish what they want their guidelines to be for interaction. Then if a situation arises where team members' views are questioned, are not respected in some way, it's important for team leadership to acknowledge this and to remind the team about the commitment that they've made to one another. As all of you know, if members of the team do not feel safe to share their views at the table or are not confident that their views will be respected, it's going to be limited what a team will be able to accomplish. Orienting new team members to the purpose, to the process, and to the history of the team prior to their first meeting can go a long way to ensuring that those at the table have had introduction to the purpose and the workings of the team so that they can fully contribute in the short time that the team is together. And having a plan about how best to use the time and the expertise of the people at the table is a crucial one as well. This sounds pretty obvious, but how many of us have found ourselves in the situation where the meeting is upon us and our plan is to share a handful of things that maybe could actually as easily be shared in a group email? And so be sure that the plan for the meeting is one where it matters whether or not as you have the time of those particular people in the room. And this relates to the last point as well about bringing out the answers. Strengthening your facilitation skills will take you far in engaging your team. A good way to engage a group in a meaningful conversation is to come equipped not only with useful information to share, but also a good balance of relevant questions to ask. So now to the coordinator role and some key goals there. The coordinator or connector role is one that most, if not all of you, are familiar with if you're involved in team leadership. All of the tasks that you carry out that keep the team connected to one another and that keep the important part of what was discussed in one meeting connected to future meetings are all part of this connector or coordinator role. One of the points that you see there on the slide is that culture of accountability. And what that refers to primarily is follow-up. If points get raised in a meeting on a regular basis and because of the timing or other reasons if they get dropped, this can create a culture of lower expectations about what the team is able to accomplish. And this doesn't mean that you're required to follow through on everything that gets proposed, but to create a culture of accountability is about shaping realistic parameters and expectations for what you and the team can accomplish and follow through with together. And then in regards to anticipating meeting plans or organizing for the work, successful teams develop goals and identify system change priorities as an essential first step, or to revisit the mission, the focus, and the goals of the team. Once priority areas and needed changes have been identified, teams then organize for the work. This helps teams have a structure, a frame, a roadmap, if you will, for how your team is going to achieve the meaningful and authentic work. One way teams can organize for the work is through the protocol development cycle, a tool that is used by us here at SCDI. Other teams may develop other structures or other processes, but paying attention to this step can lead to the results the team is hoping to achieve, and it can help ensure the team stay focused on that big picture. So in terms of strategies, some strategies for keeping things and people connected is one you're all familiar with relationship building, agency visits, check-ins, rotating meeting locations, any number of ways to keep that closer connection to all of the different parts and members of the team. Spreading the responsibility within meetings in meaningful but not overwhelming ways, as stated earlier, can be a way to engage team members in the process. In addition to a chair role or meeting minutes is another way to engage team members. Another way besides meeting minutes or chair roles is during a discussion, assigning team members to listen with a particular lens. So for example, in a case consultation team discussion, ask a team member to listen with a protocol lens. Whenever someone mentions a possible change in the protocol or a change is indicated, that team member can listen for those particular points and mark those down, and that can be shared during the debriefing discussion about what the next steps will be following that case consultation. We talked some about establishing a process for following up in that previous slide, or the creating a culture of accountability. In regards to setting the stage for your next meeting, one example is if the plan is to discuss a particular topic or introduce an idea, to anticipate who you might want to have at the table for that conversation and how you might want to prepare them or brief them for the discussion ahead of time, so the team has everything they need in order to make an informed decision once that discussion happens within the team context. So don't underestimate the importance of planning time would be one suggestion, and some of the ideas mentioned above come to the surface when you allow yourself sufficient planning time. I'm going to turn this back over to Leah, and we're going to move to our Site Coordinator Leadership Panel.
Great. Thanks, Sharon. So we wanted to first present you with a broad overview and now share the experience from team coordinators in the field. And they're going to share, again, about their perspective about the leadership, facilitator, and coordinator role. If you think back to the icebergs, we did try to get varying context as well, so that you can hear from, what may be a match or a fit for your community as well. So Brenda, Heather, and Leslie, we're going to take turns each presenting. And you will also have an opportunity to ask them questions. So, we said in the beginning, if you have questions, please submit them via chat. And at any time, if their conversation sparks questions for you, again, feel free to type that out in the chat. We're going to first hear from Brenda Skogman. Brenda is from Isanti County, that's in Minnesota. And she's the coordinator of the Isanti County Sexual Assault Interagency Council, and again, an example of a team being called something else than a SART team, but again, following that model and that definition that Sharon presented earlier. Brenda is more of a system-based advocate, and at least in Minnesota, and I know this varies across the country too, we consider it a little bit more rural, although obviously quick access to the metro area. So welcome, Brenda.
Hi, everyone.
Brenda, is there anything else you want to share about Isanti County before we get started?
No, just we've been around since 1997 is when our team started. So we've been around a long time.
Okay, great. And kind of one major population area there in Cambridge, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And how big is Cambridge, Brenda?
Oh, God, I knew you'd ask me that. I would say a little smaller than, well, I would have to look it up. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay. I think it's probably right on between 5,000 and 10,000 or so.
Yeah, yep.
So let's start by just discussing the leader aspect of your role. And can you talk a little bit about what you've learned about being a leader as we described it here in the webinar so far?
Okay. I think as a leader, I'm always aware that I represent the team. My leadership is to help in the planning of what the team's going to be doing, point the team in the direction once we decide what we want to do. One way I do this plan is each year we sit down at our first meeting and decide what we want to accomplish during the next year. And so then what my job is to kind of set it up for the meetings and kind of lead the team in the direction that they want to go. One of the things that we had decided at the last year was that we wanted to collect data to see exactly how our protocol was working. And so I have done all the data collection, and I've used actually two different databases, one through law enforcement and one through prosecution. And that I've collected all the data for 2011 and 2012 and gone back to the team and said, okay, this is what we're looking at as far as trends in our community, what the age groups are, as far as what who our victims are, who our perpetrators are, and it's kind of helped us to identify what we want to do as far as protocol and training changes, ideas, issues that come up. I found also that I am the role model, and remember that I have to stay on my toes in the different settings where I represent the team. So that's kind of my job as the leader.
Great, thanks. In my role and work with teams and providing support, I'm using the word meaningful all the time and talk about meaningful work and how to get the teams there. And I'm intrigued with your data project as a strategy to have them do that meaningful work and, make the protocol and training changes and so on. Can you give us a little bit of a snapshot of like the before your team embarked on that project and the after, like just a little bit about the difference that strategy made to get to that meaningful work?
Sure. Yep. We had decided we didn't have a lot of data, a lot of monitoring and evaluation about how our protocol was working. If we were covering the major portions, if we were covering the different areas relating to sexual assault. And so in collecting the data, we've been able to decide, if there's agencies that we want to be including in our team, if there's kind of different, if whether it be school or, maybe it's one specific type of agency in our community. So it's helped us to kind of determine, basically in our area, our age group is 16 to probably 24, 25, and so what we've looked at is doing more training in the high schools, more not so much training but prevention and education in the high schools, in the colleges. We've also looked at how many cases are prosecuted once they come, once they're reported to law enforcement. And so we're setting up a training right now just to do that training so that more cases can be prosecuted once they're sent up to the county attorney's office. And just kind of training law enforcement to what they need to be, including maybe some of the things that may be forgotten. We're also looking at suspect exams, which is a big thing that we haven't done, but our data has shown that we should be doing them because there may be evidence to be collected. So that's kind of, it's been very interesting with the data.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Brenda.
Yep.
So let's talk about the facilitator role. What have you learned?
I think the biggest part of my role as facilitator is to develop the trust between the team or with the team, developing the relationships between the different team members. I think my experience and commitment has helped. It's taken time to develop that trust and those relationships, but I've been in this position now for over 10 years, and so at first it was the team members were kind of like, oh, you'll be gone soon, and they didn't have a lot of confidence in a coordinator staying or a person staying in this position for long. So I think the interaction in the meetings is very important, and the team really needs to do the work that we're looking at. I also process what activities best fit into the committee versus the full meetings. We have a training committee, which is a smaller committee right now. We have a committee that's going to be looking at getting the protocol ready for suspect evaluations. So I think that different activities require different organization, and so that's kind of just the organizing of it is my role as facilitator. If no one's talking in the meetings, I usually start the conversation, and it seems to go from there. People kind of add in and go off of that. So sometimes the hardest part is just getting the conversation started. Also, I'll ask a tough question or start the conversation, and when no one's responding, I kind of ask questions of a specific discipline that it would refer to. So say it's something to do with law enforcement, I'd kind of ask one of our law enforcement officers, so, if this was the situation, how would you guys handle it, or what do you guys want to see happen? So, and that usually draws everybody else in to kind of get the other agencies involved. So, my question, kind of the question I might ask is, what do you think about this? And they usually go off of that. So, that's kind of my idea as a facilitator.
Great. Thanks, Brenda, and thanks for talking about if no one is talking in the meetings, because I know
Yeah.
it can be a common conundrum
Yep.
with team coordinators across the country. Well, let's move on to the coordinator role. Your insights into that.
I think the coordinator role is I do more of the grunt work, if you want to call it that, and that way the team can look at the big picture and work on the big picture. I do the meeting minutes, the notes, the little stuff, you know, typing up the protocol and stuff like that so that they can look at developing the protocol and helping victims and preparing the agencies so that they follow the protocol or that we have the best possible protocol that there is. So, you know, I handle the team turnover and changes. We just did an orientation book, which is handed out to all of our new members, and once we had it ready, we handed it out to everybody to start out with. And so my job is updating those forms that may be needed in that book. So let's see. I think it's just my job to do the little stuff so that the team can do the big stuff.
Right, great. Thanks for mentioning the orientation books, too. I think that's a great way to bring new members aboard. You know, how many times have we gone to a meeting or something like that and we're left wondering, you know, what's my role here? What's the function of the team? And if, you know, you attend to that prior to, you know, just bringing somebody aboard, I think it can, you know, help that person, one, understand the team, and two, make a meaningful contribution.
Yep.
So any other words of wisdom? We do have a few questions coming in, and we will get to the questions at the end, I promise. Thank you,
Thanks.
Brenda.
Yep.
Next, we're going to move on to Heather Brantner from Baltimore City Sexual Assault Response Team. Heather can talk a little bit more about her role, a very unique position, coordinating that sexual assault response team within the city, and obviously a much more urban environment. Welcome, Heather.
Hi, good afternoon, and thank you for having me.
Oh, our pleasure. So is there anything else before we get started on the questions, Heather, that you want the participants to know about Baltimore City or your role?
Well, I'll just say that the Baltimore City is a city of about 620,000 people. The SART has been in existence for a long time, but was definitely reorganized and re-energized after the Baltimore Sun produced a report indicating that Baltimore had the highest unfounded rates in the country for the previous 4 years back in 2010. We've been doing a lot of work, and a lot of change has come about in the past 2.5 to 3 years. I've been here since March of 2011, and it was part of all of those changes that the mayor had ordered an audit and to focus on the issue that they wrote for funding and received funding for a full-time SART coordinator.
Great. Thank you for that background, Heather. And we're going to start also with you about discussing the leader aspect of your role. And can you just talk about what you've learned about being a leader?
Yeah, I think that this is a very unique leadership position. I've been in leadership roles in various jobs, but this is very unique. I really worked initially to create buy-in both collectively and individually, and continue to do that to ensure that everybody continues to work together and stays on board. We're trying to accomplish change collectively as a group, but some of the things that we do and some of the things that I can do as a leader impacts the individual agencies to be better as well, which ultimately impacts victims for the better. I've found that sometimes I'm in the position to fight for individual partners. For example, if I'm trying to get the police department more resources, such as more detectives for the sex offense unit, or we're writing for grant funding in order to get an advocate, a new advocate for the Rape Crisis Center. et cetera. And in this way, I think, I'm able to help further our mission and also gain trust so that we work better together.
Great, thanks. And I think that's a great point. We're getting quite a few questions coming in now about protocols and buy-in and things like that. And your point about, getting that buy-in collectively and individually, but how it's ongoing, I think is really, really important.
Yeah, and the other thing that's ongoing is helping the team to focus on the mission, and looking at the bigger picture and managing the ups and downs of this collaborative process.
Right.
One of the things that we did initially was to create a best practices committee. We talked a little bit about best practices earlier. And so the first thing that we did as a SART was to look at what's out there already, what are the national best practices. And then the committee created a list based on those other resources for each individual partner. The partners then reviewed the practices to see if they were in line, reviewed their own practices to see if they were in line with best practices, why not, and then presented their findings to the larger SART.
Great. And a great example of how to use, a specific strategy to actually make change, within the criminal justice system and for victims. You had said that you've been in different leadership roles, and this one is quite unique. Can you just say a little bit more about why you think this position is so unique?
Yeah, I think it goes back a little bit to the fact that there are so many players at the table, and it kind of goes back to your iceberg illustration that my role to coordinate all of these various entities, but to do so in a way that allows them to take charge and for their issues to be at the forefront. I think in my previous roles, it was my job to set the goals, my job to figure out how we're going to make it happen. Whereas in this one, if I'm the only one deciding those things, you're not going to have help and cooperation from the other entities.
Great, thanks. And I think that's just such an important message to hear. And what a complex job this is and role this is. Well, how about being a facilitator? Your insights into that?
I think the interagency agreements that we've made has been helpful, allowing me to facilitate all of these working parts, is that every partner knows what they are supposed to be doing because we review it annually, we look at the roles and expectations in the MOU, and we even get pretty detailed in terms of who is expected to attend larger SART meetings, a commitment from them if the top leadership isn't able to come, that they will send representation and someone who can make decisions and make things happen so that we don't play tag, well, I'll go and talk to this person and get back to the group, et cetera. And they also send representatives to every subcommittee or work group so that each work group or subcommittee is represented by the multidiscipline process. I also facilitate the meetings, obviously, and sometimes I have to take a step back and realize that my priorities may not be the team's priorities, and that sometimes my role as a leader is in a slight conflict with my role as a facilitator. Because, as the leader, I may see that, a pressing issue is forensic exams, drug-facilitated sexual assault. But I take that to the team, and they are quiet about that or don't seem to have a lot of interest. Then it's my job to step back from that and facilitate their goals and their priorities, and maybe circle back around to that when another partner shows interest or there's an issue.
Right. So sometimes it can be, knowing when the team may be ready for that work. But, I'm prepping for this call with you. I was really struck by, how you explained how sometimes that leadership role and facilitation role can be in conflict. And, I hadn't thought about it that way before, so thank you for that. How about now your insights into the coordinator role?
I attend to all the different elements, of course, the minutes, the agendas, assigning tasks, and so on. And I have ideas for the agenda, but I also actively seek input, for the agenda items based on the interests and needs of the partners. If something doesn't seem to be working in the meetings, or you don't have a lot of buy-in, then it's my job to actively seek input and ask the right questions. I think it was mentioned before that, trying to do open-ended questions and trying to make it relate to what the individual partners' priorities are.
Right. And being prepped with those questions beforehand. And, my work with team leaders, I often say, can you come into the meeting with your key questions, those open-ended questions, what you're hoping conversation will be at this meeting, and that can go a long way to help team coordinators, I think, have kind of a backup if that conversation's not flowing, or, sometimes people just don't quite know how to answer or how to begin it.
Well, and I think that's really important, and Leslie touched on it earlier, that you have to be able to ask the questions that are sometimes uncomfortable or difficult in order to get the conversation rolling. It's the only way that meaningful work can happen sometimes. If you ignore the elephant in the room or whatever the issue might be, I think it actually causes stagnation and for people to feel like the process isn't genuine or effective. So you have to create an environment in which people understand that you're going to ask difficult questions and we're going to have those conversations.
Right.
Also, that accountability piece that you talked about under this aspect is, we do that in a number of ways. And it was one of the things that we really hit on when we first started forming because of the trouble that the city had been in over these issues, that we knew we needed to hold everybody accountable and be as transparent as possible. So whether it's the annual report or the actual SART meetings or the stats that we keep and then review as a whole group every year, the audit committee, definitely, there's a lot of ways that you can hold people accountable.
Right. That's a great point. Thank you, Heather. Any other words of wisdom?
Nope. I think that's it.
All right. Well, you shared a lot. Thank you. All right, so next up we have Leslie Miller. Leslie represents all sorts of different icebergs if we keep looking at that picture. Leslie is the team coordinator and leader for the Salt Lake SART, so a specific team. And then she is also the Utah SART coordinator and provides support to teams in various stages of formation and work across Utah, and obviously in that works with a lot of rural and urban aspects as well. So we asked Leslie to be here today because she has this great contribution of wearing multiple hats. So thank you, Leslie, and welcome. And Leslie, you need to press *7 to unmute.
Can you hear me?
Oh, we can hear you. Welcome.
Okay, good. Yes, thank you for having me.
Yeah. Well, I shared a little bit about your role and, the unique area you cover, Leslie, but is there anything else you want to share just so that participants understand who you are in your work?
Well, yeah, let me start by saying that I have been doing this work for almost 4 years now, and I am the first statewide SART coordinator here in the state of Utah, so no one else has had this job before, so I get to invent it and get to kind of mold it to the way that I want to. So no one has any expectation of me to say this is how it's supposed to be, which has been kind of nice for me. I am the coordinator of the Salt Lake City SART, and so in Salt Lake County, we have a population of about 189,000, but throughout the whole state of Utah, our population is about 2.8 million. So I do wear many, many, many hats, and this has been a very challenging undertaking, but also very rewarding because I'm being able to get around and see my lovely state, and it's been a challenge. The Salt Lake County SART has been in existence now for almost 11 years, and so I have been doing this for, now, like I said, for almost 4 years. So.
Great, Leslie. Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to learn from you.
Thank you.
So let's start by discussing that leader aspect of your role in your words of wisdom.
My words of wisdom, well, I think that when I came on board, I was in a very unique position because, like I said, no one had held the position I held before. And the Salt Lake County, and I'm going to speak specifically right now, at least from the point of view from the Salt Lake County SART, because that's the team that I am the team coordinator for, and I do have a specific leadership role in that team.
Great.
But when I came on board, that team had been already meeting for quite some time, and no one had held my position before. And I came on board at a time when we had the opportunity to begin receiving technical assistance from SVJI. And so I came on board where nobody really had any expectation of me, and these members had already known each other. And so that could be a challenge. I look at that as in two ways. I look at it as a challenge and an opportunity, because I was the new kid on the block, but also I was the new kid on the block. So that's a challenge,
Right.
and that was a challenge and an opportunity. But that initial team training I had, it gave me the opportunity to talk about my role and what I learned at that time. And what am I trying to say? What I'm trying to say is what resonated me at that time was that I was going to be an advocate for my team. I was going to be an advocate for everybody in that room. It didn't matter what agency you represent or what discipline you represented. I was going to be an advocate for that team, and that's my objective. That's my process of thinking, is that I am an advocate for the team. And so when it comes to leadership, one thing I do is, and one thing that's always resonated with me is recognizing courage, and what that means to be a member of that team is recognizing courage and being able to be in a safe place to say something that I feel is important and that the team feels important. It takes a lot of work and a lot of patience, and I have to be able to look at the big picture and be a visionary for the team. So I need to really work. We have to work as a collective, and so it's been a process, because there was some conflict in the team when I first came to the team, and as being a new person, I didn't have any biases, and so that was to my advantage. So
Right. And I think, you said courage and recognizing that, and, stating intentionally with the team that you're not for or against any agency, but a facilitator of the team, which I know Heather and Brenda, also talked about as well. Before we move on to facilitator, any other things you want to share about the leadership aspect?
One thing that our team jumped on right away, and that I really enjoyed being a guiding force for them, was when we did our community assessment. That was a real good project for our team. And projects, being a leader and overseeing projects is a good way to bring your team together, to work on, to bring cohesiveness to the team. That was one project that really seemed to bring our team together, to build cohesiveness, to bring solidarity to the team. it really was a way for our team to figure out that, hey, we are a team, and we are working for a common goal, and we are doing the same thing, that we do have commonalities, and that we all do want the same thing. And so I think that it's very important to provide your team direction and a foundation by working on projects like that. And we got some good information when we worked on our community needs assessment, and out of that assessment, we really found out some things that we didn't know, and we found out some things that we thought we knew that we didn't know. And out of that, we've been able to make some improvements to our response.
Right, and a great example of organizing for the work, you know, and how it feeds into that team sustainability and things. All right, well, let's move on to facilitator and what you have learned in your 4 years.
What I've learned most importantly, I think, and first and foremost about facilitating teams is I think the key priority is you have to build trust. It's about trust building. You have to build an environment where people feel comfortable to share, where people feel safe enough to have a voice. And that, again, is a process, especially where you have multidisciplines meeting together. And it's very important that you set up an environment where you make sure that each discipline or each agency feels and knows and believes that they each have equal weight, that not one agency is more valuable than the other, that each person at that table has an equal contribution, that not one agency's contribution is more valuable than the other. And so some of the ways that we do that at our team meetings is that we have ground rules, you know, and guidelines for each meeting. And I'm always aware of what that process looks like and what's best accomplished and how we best accomplish things at our meeting. Like sometimes we'll have small committee work before meetings, depending on what the focus of our meeting is. Sometimes not. Sometimes I'll make sure that I check in with individual members of our team before group meetings. But to me, it's important that each member of our team feels comfortable and safe, and I want people to be able to share freely at those meetings. So.
Great. Thanks, Leslie. So let's say we're at the meetings, and Brenda and Heather already touched upon this, but I'm going to ask you too because it's such a common question that we get at SVJI. So what is your advice for when a team coordinator asks questions in a meeting or invites feedback and is met with those crickets that I often hear, or that silence or non-engagement?
That never happens.
No.
That never happens. I think that you have to be very intentional on how you ask questions and the type of questions you ask. I think it goes back to understanding your role. You have to understand that as a team coordinator, people look at you as a leader, and people are going to always look to you for the answers, and they're going to look to you for knowledge, and that's why you're the facilitator, because they're looking to you for the answer. So you have to be, and I know this sounds really unfair, so you have to be kind of manipulative on how you ask questions. And so what I do sometimes is when I know that I have a question, I'll kind of set the tone by asking people ahead of time before a meeting, I'm going to ask this question. You know, so I'm going to kind of prep this person for a question. So, you know, I don't expect them to have the best answer, but just be prepared to answer the question to kind of set up a tone to discuss, to set a tone for conversation to start a conversation around the question. And sometimes that's how you get the best answers, when you kind of set it up so you can kind of start a conversation, because sometimes you get those spontaneous answers just by kind of like setting up a conversation. So, but I think people truly do, as a facilitator, as a meeting, people kind of look to you for the answers.
Right.
And so you have to be kind of intentional about how you ask questions.
Yeah. Yeah, I had a little aha moment when we were talking about this webinar when you said to remember your role, and sometimes your role in this is to bring out the knowledge, and sometimes that means just sharing it. You know, maybe that's not the time for questions, but for you sharing that knowledge, and then to know when the time is to, you know, elicit that input and question and bring out that wisdom in the room. I think that can be really key, and how sharing some knowledge can also generate some really great conversation too.
Yes.
Yeah. So, insights into the coordinator role. When I first asked you about that, you giggled and said, that's the easy part. So can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, that is the easy part. If that's all it was, I would be I would have a very easy job. The coordinator part is easy. It makes sense. I mean, it's the preparing of the agenda. It's asking people for feedback of what they think should be on the agenda, what they would like to talk about. To me, it's the technical stuff. It's like what someone said earlier. I think it was Brenda said earlier. It's doing the grunt work. It's preparing the media stuff or the meeting space. It's making sure you have all the equipment there. If you're going to have snacks or whatever, you're making sure all of that's together. It's making sure all the right people are at the table. Sometimes it's making sure the wrong people are at the table. You know, but one thing that I find also as the coordinator, I find that it's also important. That's that team accountability piece too. And I always make sure that my team holds me accountable. It's important for them to hold me accountable because if I'm not being held accountable, then what good am I to the team? So they hold me accountable, and it's very important for me to be transparent. And I expect my team members to hold me accountable, and I hold them accountable too. So
great, thanks, Leslie. Any other words of wisdom?
No, just take care of yourself doing this work.
That's very great to hear.
Just take care of yourself.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we're going to still have Heather and Brenda and Leslie on the line. First, I want to say thank you and give our contact information here real briefly before we get to the questions. Sharon's email is there, and my email is there, and we also wanted to do a thank you to the Office on Violence Against Women who support this webinar series and some of our other work with team, and without that support we wouldn't be able to offer that. So first, our contact information, and now we're going to move on to questions. We have about 15 minutes left. I'm going to read the questions and invite our panel first to weigh in on their response, and then Sharon and I will also contribute as well. We have quite a few questions, so we'll get through as many as we can. I also want to really honor your time commitment, and like at 1:30 we'll do a little check-in and see where we're at with things. So our first question comes from a new coordinator for a SART team. In Colorado, a fairly small rural community, and wanted to know if you could talk a little about how your team approached the community input piece of developing the protocols. So, for example, questionnaires, public forums, etc.
This is Brenda. We did focus groups. We also did the victim experience survey. So that's kind of how we got the community's input and approached that.
Great. And there is another question for you specifically, Brenda.
Sure.
Since you've been in your role for quite a while, how have you evaluated your team?
We actually have evaluations in place. What we do is we have certain evaluations that are filled out by different disciplines. So if a case goes through medical and goes through law enforcement, what we do is send out all the different agencies that dealt with that victim to do a basic interview or a questionnaire evaluation type thing that says, okay, how did you work with the other agencies? What did you feel could have been improved? We also send evaluations out to not team members, but the members of their organizations, and get their input about, do they know about the protocol? When was the last time they were trained? Can they talk to their supervisor about the protocol? So we've kind of done it that way as far as evaluating members. We also have a questionnaire or a consent that's signed by the victim if they're willing to talk to us at a later date about how the protocol worked, what we could improve with the different agencies or with the protocol. So that's kind of, we do it kind of 3 different ways, and that's worked well for us.
Great. And so you do like a Survey Monkey and things like that to team members, Brenda?
Yeah, we haven't done the Survey Monkey yet because we're not that advanced, but I'm getting there. We've done just a typed one that we've sent out, but we're getting better. We're working on Survey Monkey, and hopefully the next time we do this formal evaluation, it'll be on Survey Monkey.
But I think a great point in that, you know, different, I think, strategies for different teams. So paper, online, you know, I think they have to figure out what works. Yep. So a couple more questions for you, Brenda, and then we have some questions for Heather. Somebody wants to know if you're willing to share a template of your orientation book or packet.
Oh, definitely.
All right, and I'll follow up with that information.
Yep.
And last question for Brenda, if you could please describe briefly how you facilitated all team members to develop actual protocols, like actually facilitated those individual discussions or the group set, or did you do it within a group? If you can talk briefly about that. Yep,
we started as the big team, and then we went down into work groups, which were the writing and training, or the writing, the training, different groups. We went into smaller. The second and third time around that we've revised our protocol, we've actually had, as far as, we have 4 different law enforcement agencies involved, and so we had all 4 of those agencies take the protocol and approve the protocol for law enforcement. We had nurses, the medical staff approved that one. And then we brought it back to the team, and we actually had that agency present it to the team, their new protocol or their revisions, and the team kind of questioned that and asked the different agencies questions, and then we went from there. So it's kind of been a team process, but we've also gone down into smaller work groups and individual agencies.
Right, and a great example of knowing what's full team and like committee work.
Yes, yep.
All right, thanks, Brenda. Stay on the line.
Okay.
More questions are coming in, but we have some questions for Heather now. So Heather, a general question first on your thoughts of sustaining a SART initiative.
Wow, that's a good question.
It is.
SART initiative or the SART coordinator? Just let me clarify.
I think both. You know, how you sustain your position and make the use of your time, and then the sustainability for the team.
Okay. Yeah, because both are actually very challenging in different ways. But, you know, so my position was originally funded through Governor's Office on Crime Control and Prevention grant. And we've spent, that was a 2-year grant, and we've just applied for further funding. But one of the priorities that the SART recognized this past time when we did our annual report was finding permanent funding for this SART coordinator position, because it's very difficult, obviously, to rely on grant funding, and the team really values, and not because it's me, but they value having somebody in this role. They've seen a significant difference in what they're able to accomplish by having somebody do all of the things we just spent the last hour talking about. So we are working with the city. You know, I work for the Mayor's Office on Criminal Justice, and so we're working, the SART is working to receive funding through the mayor's office, through the city, for at least part of my salary. And we've continued to seek grant funding as well. As far as the team goes, we were definitely pulled into action, and I think this will answer Julie. Also, Julie asked a question about how do you get people engaged and involved and keep coming to meetings. I think our SART prior to the news in 2010 was an example of kind of a dinosaur SART. Wasn't very effective. And so I wouldn't wish a scandal or drama on anybody, but having the attention focused on us definitely forced us to come to the table and work together. But as the almost 3 years since then, it has definitely ebbed and flowed in terms of excitement, energy, commitment from various partners. One of the things that I do is if I see a partner who's not attending regularly, is that I'll go and talk to them. I'll ask why. Part of that, again, the job of asking difficult and direct questions. And really, really important, I think, is the buy-in from the top of those different partners. The chief of police may not, the police commissioner or chief of police may not come to every SART meeting, but his sex offense major better, and if he or she doesn't, then you've got to have those conversations with that chief or that captain saying, we need your presence, it's important.
Right. Yeah, and I think, when you're talking about like the dinosaur SART and things like that, I think that's a really important thing to pay attention to, is that SART teams can appear effective on the outside. Maybe they have great relationships or maybe not, but what we were really trying to do in this webinar is think about how effective SART teams can actually lead to, substantial changes, which you've all given great examples. But I think that we have to remember that the SART team is not the goal, it's the strategy to getting that change. We had just a little bit more a question on agency agreements and examples of how to make that meaningful. Sharon talked about that as well. I would add that specific, what you said, Heather, is really, really important. Revisit them often. Your team revisits them annually, and link it to the work of the team and what stage they're at. So if you want them to be committed to implementing protocol or protocol changes or training or so on. But this question came up during your presentation, Heather, so any other comments about the meaningful agency agreements?
No, I don't think so. Again, I think it's making sure that you're specific enough that it's not just a piece of paper, and that you do revisit them. It's the same way with our mission and values and standards that we've written. Everything that we do and talk about, we bring back to, is this in line with what we said our values and standards are?
Great, thanks. And last question for you, Heather, before we move on to Leslie. Ideas or suggestions to encourage law enforcement and prosecution to attend meetings and stay engaged?
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm the best person to answer that, because the law enforcement, at least, because I work out of the mayor's office, I have some pull there, and so they almost have to be responsive. We got very lucky, though, and we've gotten wonderful sex offense leadership, and so we haven't, necessarily had to pull that, but it's really about making them see how it benefits them. And whenever possible, I make sure that I send successes out to the entire team. We just had a successful conviction of a serial rapist, and I sent out an email of thanks to everyone and outlined how every partner played a role in that conviction. It wasn't just the state's attorney's office and just the police. But if you engage them in positive ways, I think that they see that they're an important piece of this bigger picture, and they want to participate in that. They want to, when you're making positive changes, they want to be a part of that success.
Right. And I think staying neutral, is key to that as well. All right. Well, we have a few more questions coming in, but we're going to move on to Leslie, some that came in during her presentation. Leslie, you still with us?
I am.
All right. So question for you. What kind of advocating is being done as a leader, and what are the challenges?
Well, as a leader, when I say, and I'm assuming that this question is coming out when I say that I advocate for my team,
Yeah.
is being an advocate for the team. Is like advocating for the team is what I mean by that is I am advocating for the team. I'm advocating for the needs of the team, and so whatever the team needs is I am advocating for whatever that need is. What the challenge is that I am willing to do the hard stuff. I am willing to go. I'm not attached to any agency, so I'm attached to my coalition. So I'm not attached to any law enforcement agency or any sane agency or any community nonprofit agency. So I'm willing to talk about or advocate for the unpopular subjects that maybe some of the agencies can't go to, and so I'm a voice for my team. The challenging part is that sometimes a very hard road to navigate. And I have to make sure that I am sending the right message for my team, and I have to remember I'm a voice for all of my team, not just for one specific discipline. So that sometimes the waters can sometimes get a little bit muddied because I don't want to leave out anybody.
Right.
I have to be able to make sure that I am sending a message that works for the team as a collective and not just for one part of my team.
All right.
Okay.
And last question for you, Leslie. Can you share how you actually developed the ground rules and norms, guidelines for your team, and when you were talking about how they interact in the meetings as a way to develop trust and so on?
Sure. I didn't do that at all. The team did that. So what we did as a team, as in one of our very first meetings, is, and sometimes we do revisit this, maybe every 6 months or so we will revisit this, is that the team comes up with the idea or the plans of what's acceptable in our meetings when we meet. So they come up with what's acceptable behavior, what does interaction look like that will support the team to move forward and do meaningful and productive work. The team comes up with those ground rules. So it may look like saying something like no one will overtalk the other person when somebody's talking. No one else will speak while that person is talking, or communication will be respectful, or something like that. So the team comes up with those ground rules and what that looks like, and we write them down, and that's how it works for the next 6 months until we revisit it again.
Great. Thanks, Leslie.
You're welcome.
A great specific example.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we're at our time. We do have a few more questions about dealing with conflict and, teams that have been together for quite a while, what you do during the meetings and so on. We will follow up if we did not get to your question and provide you with some considerations and some things to think about. I really want to thank Brenda and Heather and Leslie for the work that you do in your communities and allowing all of us to learn from you. So thank you for being part of this webinar. And the last slide here is just Sharon presented some of the research and made some references to it either in the slides or as she was describing the information on the slide, and we wanted to provide that information to you as well. Good luck in your work. Go forward, building those strong teams, and remember the team is a strategy for making a change. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Please stand by.